Hello, and welcome to our panel, Build Your Game Making Practice, Tabletop RPGs from Design to Production. My name's Hayley, and I'm going to be moderating our panel today. Tabletop role-playing games are a unique medium, and we all create and design in different ways. And today I'm joined by three game makers, Leo Chung, David Naylor, and Vee Hendro, as they share their approaches at different points in the process. From generating ideas to the writing process to playtesting and publishing and more, we'll delve into how these creators here are thinking about the design process. And hopefully you can pick up useful hints and tips to incorporate into your own game making practice. So to start off, let's ask each of them to introduce ourselves. So Leo, would you like to jump in first?
Hi, yes, I'm Leo. I'm the creator of Parslings. I do a little bit of everything. I illustrated my own game, I did game design, and I did most of the writing. And I really just stepped into this, I think, 2-3 years ago. And I've kickstarted Parslings, and it was pretty successful.
Great. David, do you want to jump in next?
So g'day, I am Dave. or Good Ship Fun Trip online. I am the digital content manager at Chaosium and a Melbourne-based RPG writer, designer, etc. Currently, I'm working on a project called Time Without Tide, which is sort of role-playing in a Victorian post-apocalyptic setting. So that's a lot of fun.
Very cool. And Vee?
Hello, I am Vee Hendro. I am one half of Story Brews Roleplaying with Hayley, and I do game design with Story Brewers. We've designed Good Society, a Jane Austen RPG, as well as a series of little box RPGs, which are like one-shot role-playing games. And I also do a bit of freelance graphic designs on a lot of different games as well. So a lot of layout.
Great. So we have a number of questions that we are going to cover today that span the full range of the process from initially how you might think about a new game idea to all the way down the track to publishing your RPG. And once it's made, what do you do next? So let's begin at the beginning of the process. We often can think of a lot of game ideas. There's lots of things that jump into our heads. But how do you know when an RPG idea is going to be the one that you're going to take all the way through the publishing process? What is it that stands out to you or makes you want to chase that vision? David, would you like to start us off with this one?
Sure. So I think a lot of ideas are really exciting while there's still that sort of like green fields, everything's perfect, I don't have anything on paper, nothing's gone wrong yet kind of thing, right? So I think it's really once you try something, even if it's just that beginning mechanic, or pitch that first idea to a couple of testers, whether they're friends or strangers at a convention, and you start getting some feedback and see that other people are really into it as well. And some of it, just at least one or two aspects of it look like they are going to work. And it's enough to, spike that and then take it into further testing. So I think once you start to get some more feedback is when it really begins to take legs.
Yes, when you open it up to the viewpoints of people that are not yourself.
Scary.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Leo, what about you? What's your approach?
Well, usually I take a look at what's already on the market and see what I would like to play that isn't out there. And then, much like Time Without Tide, I go and have a look and test it out with a couple friends. Then I get a group of friends to do it without me and see if they still have the same fun. And if it passes those two tests, I continue to develop. So really, it's all about playtesting and all about finding what niches I can fill.
Right, that's awesome. So you would be an advocate for blind playtesting quite early on in the process then?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you can't get someone to play your game without you, then you're going to have trouble writing up the rules.
Yeah, I can see that. Vee, how about you? What's your approach?
I agree with both of sort of the wisdom in what's been said before. But the other thing that I tend to also do a lot is like leave it to time. I think in our pipeline of like all the future games we may make, there's always like a bank of them that we kind of talk about, but it's like the cream rising to the top. Like what ends up the idea that ends up being the thing you come back to in like 6 months, a year, that you kind of can't get rid of, tends to be something that I end up feeling like, okay, it's there for the long haul. And there's promise in that I want to build up. So I think you never really forget good ideas because they're the ones that keep coming back.
Yeah, they rise to the top like the cream. Yes, I feel that. So let's move a little bit forward down the pipeline of the creation process. So RPG projects are much like other projects in that you have to go through a series of stages: ideation, design, writing, and editing and more to come out with the finished results. So I would be interested in hearing what your approaches are to keeping your writing and your project focused and on track, and what tips you might give to someone else trying to do the same. Leo, do you want to start us off for this one?
Well, I guess really, at least with tabletop RPGs, you have to be kind of in love with the project. You kind of have to love the idea. You have to love the process, and you need to be playing the game all the way through from design, from start to finish. So even if you're doing writing, even if you're doing game design, you need to be playing your game. You need to be play testing, and you need to be getting new ideas from your interactions with others. You need to be talking about your game. If at any point you do start to lose that desire to want to talk about your project or what you're doing, then the momentum that you get kind of slows down. And if you're working solo on the project, it can be very difficult to start the momentum again. So it's very important to, I guess, keep the project alive.
So have you ever been in a stage where you're maybe going through final bogged down in editing, or you're trying to work out production and you just feel things slowing down? And if you do, what tips do you have for sort of getting over that kind of block?
Well, I guess what you have to do is you have to break down the tasks you've got. Instead of having it as, I need to do the editing of the entire book, you do it for maybe chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And if you basically deconstruct your workload into smaller chunks, you can start ticking things off a list. And the action of ticking off the list gives you a little bit of renewed vigor as you get closer to your goal.
Yeah, I feel that. It's very satisfying, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Vee, what's your approach to staying on track and keeping things focused?
Yeah, I really like what Leo said about breaking it up into smaller chunks. One of my mates always calls that atomic units. Like really teeny tiny, the most smallest unit that you can manage is like what you break it up into, which is, I think, really helpful. I think a practical tool I use that really segues well into what Leo's talking about is like using some sort of I use an online tool called Trello or Notion. Anything with like little cards, I guess a little post-it note would even work. But like essentially you have a board with a list of your tasks written out, and every week or whatever interval of work that works for you, you kind of like look at that list and see how much you want to achieve in that interval of time, and you can kind of pull into your today, say it's like your list of the things you're going to do today, pull in from that huge list of what you got, just the top 2 or 3 that you're hoping to achieve that day, and work through it little by little. And then soon enough, the game project doesn't seem so overwhelming. So that's like one of the best ways I enjoy doing it.
So Vee, can I ask, do you have anything that you use to keep track of the project as a whole, or is it sort of an incremental approach of doing one thing at a time?
We do have an overall like project management system to deal with like the overall structure, but those tend to be a bit more loosey-goosey, and it's not until I usually plan my weeks out. So like when it gets to the week that I kind of try to fill in the amount of work that I estimate to do in that week. And then daily, I'll also break it up into a smaller list. I actually have just a really simple system of like a notepad on my desk that has my daily tasks. And paper pen works really well for me. Yeah. So the solutions aren't too difficult. But it's just about having something that keeps you accountable, like some way of keeping you accountable to yourself.
Yeah, that sort of idea where you can write out a list and wake up the next morning already knowing what it is you're going to attempt to aim for. How about you, David?
Found the mute button. Vee said Trello, and my eyes like lit up. That site's like catnip for me. I love it. We use Scrum boards for our projects as well. This was mine behind me, where I divided up into columns, but I had to stop using it because we started streaming more. But using something like this, like a whiteboard that you can just divide into columns or something, and then write out really achievable tasks on sticky notes, put them all in a backlog, and then when you're ready to work on something, move it across into what you're currently working on. I collaborate with a partner as well, writing on projects, so we can sort of review one another's work, and it makes the whole process really transparent. And that kind of makes it accountable because you know where things are, you know when something's lingering. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means maybe you need some help or you need to revisit it and try again, think about what the process is going to look like. So we use a pretty simple system.
So you actually used to have your tasks written behind you on the wall, is that right?
Yeah, I love it that way. I think it's so visible, and there's something really, really satisfying about tearing off a sticky note or something, crumpling up and putting it in a bin. You're like, that is done. I'm not going back. And then, of course, you do the next week.
So you mentioned that some things can get stuck. What tips do you have if you realize that there's a Post-it note that has been sticking on there so long that it's starting to peel off of its own accord and slowly drop onto the ground?
I think when stuff like that happens, it's probably because you've bitten off a task that's more than you can chew. Like Leo was saying, make them small and bite-size so that you can work through them. Larger things aren't going to happen all in one day. So it's probably because it's too large and you might need to revisit it, tear it in two, write two smaller tasks and work on one of those. Or if you're really stuck, more testing, bounce ideas off someone else.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've talked a fair bit about playtesting already, about its importance. So let's delve into that a little bit. So playtesting is obviously a really great tool to improve the games that we create. And I'm interested, what advice would you give to someone if they told you that they were planning to playtest their game tomorrow? How could they get the most out of that experience? Vee, would you like to start us off for this one?
Yeah, I think if you were going to do it tomorrow, one of the things I would go ahead and do is come up with a list of questions that you want to know about your game yourself at this point. So that you can ask directly of those specific things. Work out if you want to, what specifically are you testing? And then the other thing that I find really useful is to also make notes every time someone asks you a question about game rules or something that isn't clear. So if they're interacting with your game and they still have questions or they're still unsure, I like to kind of like keep a running list of that. That I can come back to later as maybe like, is this clear or not? Is it not? So it's easier if you're doing it, so then you won't forget. Yeah.
Is there a difference in your mind between early stage playtesting and late stage playtesting and how you might approach those, or is it sort of the same process?
Yeah, I'd be really interested if other people have a different way of approaching this, but I definitely feel like with my early stage playtesting, I'm actually like much more open to I usually, my list of questions look very different. They're all like really open-ended, and they're much more about like exploring what that experience might be like and just like curiousness about how people are responding to what I've put out there. Whereas later stage playtesting, obviously what a lot more of the rules have been like worked out. I have very specific questions that I want answered, like whether it's balancing issues, whether it's like this bit, how long does this particular stage of the game take, etc. Like it's very specific. So it definitely narrows down, and I approach them really differently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So David, what would be your approach? So, what advice would you give to someone who is playtesting tomorrow?
We've definitely found the same thing where at the beginning you're really just going for engagement, like are people excited about the game, and later on when you have specific questions. General advice, I'd say that collect all the feedback and make sure that it's something that you can interpret or something that you can actually use. A lot of people give feedback just on, first things in their mind, and that might be useful. But it's up to you to give them questions for what you actually want to be answered. We began with having quite complicated questions, which just weren't useful because people got too far into the weeds, when really what we wanted to know was what excited you and what do you think could be improved on? So yeah, just like simple things like that can go a really long way, especially once you get a large number of people responding.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Leo, how about you?
Well, I guess it depends on how far they've gone into their playtesting. Have they gone through? Is it the very first time they're showing the game to anyone? And in which case, if it is, I'd maybe say pull back on the playtesting first and do something called a blind read through. So you essentially hand them the rules, you get them to read out and talk to you in a stream of consciousness about what they're reading, what they're seeing, and then you do it again with someone else that has no context. And you may not even be in the room, and you get them to record themselves, whether it's voice or video or whatever. The idea is that them going through without any bias and just talking out loud, you'll get to pick up on what rules they get stuck on, what settings or what pieces they got excited by, what they feel the core of your game is. So by having that first blind read through, you get a lot more data about how your blind playtest is going to go. And then there's a couple different blind playtests to consider. Whether or not you're present, you're watching, you're hearing, and you're getting them to answer questions. Or whether you're doing a playtest where you're not even there and someone else is facilitating. Or you're giving it to a group to try out for the first time with no context and see where they get stuck with the rules. And that third one isn't something that always happens within tabletop RPGs, but I think is actually a very vital step, that if you go away and you've given them a set of rules, they can understand the heart of it. And that means that you've got a system that kind of works, and then you can always build from there. But if they don't understand, then you have to go back to the drawing board.
So when you approach playtesting, do you already have an outward-facing version of the rules before you start playtesting?
Usually, yeah. I know it's probably not traditional to do so, but I feel it gives your players, your blind playtesters, confidence in you, in your project, that you know what you're doing, that you're doing a very professional thing, and that their effort spent learning your game is not going to go poof somewhere. Like the game isn't just suddenly going to dissolve into thin air.
Interesting. Vee and David, does that match up with your experience? Do you ever do playtesting before you have a written rule set?
When we've shared stuff early before, we've done like unique packets for it rather than giving them the full rule book. We'd make small booklets which are very trimmed down and try to sort of introduce the setting, the core resolution mechanic, and a couple of like the exciting pieces of it. But in the past, we've actually held on quite a long before really opening up the whole book, because, and I think it's actually probably a downside. I think opening it up earlier we would have been stronger for it, like Leah's suggested. But yeah, so what we've tried doing is just smaller booklets, get some core information from them, and then only really release the bigger stuff once it's fine-tuned and we're a lot more confident with it.
I actually do the exact same thing as you said. I actually do release in smaller chunks. So it is better to give people smaller chunks. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I think we do the complete opposite in that. Like, I don't think I've ever had like a fully written out rule set that I give to someone. The first few playtests I do, when I open it up, me or Hayley will facilitate. Like, I know what the current rule set is in my mind, but it's written out in like a trash can, very opaque way. And that's the first kind of rounds as we're working through the mechanics, because usually they're not really settled, and it's much faster for us to change out bits on the fly, because it's just changing so much, and we can do that in between the playtests without having to update a document particularly. And then we do a second, in the later playtesting as well, is when we'll do the technical writing for the project, and that's its own sort of like playtesting specifically for the rule. So I guess it's a different time that I do those different kinds of playtesting too.
Yeah, so it's almost two things to consider, like the initial game design and how that is being responded to, and then of course the technical writing, whether people can understand how to play your game in the way that you would love them to, from which, as we know, isn't always how they're going to play it. From what you've written, that's a whole separate thing that also, it's really important to test both those aspects of the game. Awesome. All right. So moving on a little bit from playtesting, a bit further down the process. At some point in creating your RPG, of course, you'll need to think about publishing it. And so when in the process do you turn your mind to this? And this is a big question, but how do you decide what sort of product design might be right for your game? Leo, I think I heard you. Do you want to kick us off with this one?
Oh boy, this is a big topic. I guess it depends on when you think that you are able to put resources into the game to get it out there. And there's a couple different options of going with a publisher or doing it on your own. And both have their own kind of unique problems. And it also depends on the size of your team, your budget, and if you have a set aesthetic in mind. And I think what you really do, at least for me, is I start working on the aesthetic first, because that's how I can put out something pretty, like a cover image, a book, or even just like a couple really nicely laid out pages, just to gather some attention. Because what you're doing at that stage is you're actually checking whether or not you're looking for validation in your markets, validation that your product is something that people want, and validation that you've got something that could potentially sell or could potentially, I guess, work with other people to build more content. The idea is at the start, when you're thinking about publishing, you need to say, is this a product I can market? Is this a product I can sell? Is this a product that someone else can sell for me? And I think that's the very first question you've got to look at, you've got to think about.
So can I ask you with that, how do you know what the answer to that question is? How do you, what ways do you judge whether or not that's the case from what you've put out initially?
I think I go to the meanest place on earth, which people call Reddit, and I post up a couple images, post up a bit of concept, and I wait for the flames to start. If there's a lot of positive reinforcement from Reddit, from complete strangers who may or may not love you, may not be having the best day, or if there's a lot of flack coming from that direction, then that really weighs on my decision. So if people do like it, if people are responding and asking me, hey, when's this coming out? Hey, can I try this? Hey, I'd love to help. Then I say, okay, I've got something that works. I've got something that I can work with, and that's something that people want. And then if people are hating on it, if people are causing me a lot of grief, and then I say, okay, maybe I need to take it back to the drawing board, think this through a little bit more before presenting it to the world again.
That's interesting. So how about from a game design point of view, what are the considerations there from what format you pick for your game, be it a book or a book and some cards, or a lot, we've seen books of all different formats, some very large, heavy books, smaller, lighter books. Like, of course, partly it's going to be how much space do you need to write the rules of the game. But beyond that, what informs that side of things?
I guess it's genre. It is very much genre. If you're aiming for something like D&D, that kind of crowd where you're going through dungeon crawls, where you're giving the GMs a whole block of monsters, then I'd be actually going for a heavier set book with something with a fairly quick and simple resolution. But the bulk of your product will be setting information. It'll be information about the monster's stats and items or places. It'll be all of those setting heavy pieces, the lore pieces. Whereas if I'm making the core of a system, my book's going to be a lot thinner, because I want this to be easier to carry around. I don't want it too heavy that people are going to be like, oh no, I've got to carry this tome around in order to reference my rules. You kind of want, if it's purely a system book, it a little bit thinner, so that it is easy to carry, is easy to find and sift through to the right spot. It's easy to pick up and say, aha, this is where this rule is at. And I guess it just really depends on what the content is. Hopefully I'm answering your question there.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that the marriage between like the way someone is going to use a product and the way the product is designed is very important, because obviously people are going to look for products to be designed in a way that matches up with how they're using them. So I think that's a really good point there. How about you, David? What point along the process do you think about publishing, and how do you approach the question of product design?
So ours is a lot more hypothetical because we haven't published yet. So I'm learning as much as everyone watching. Everything I've written on previously has been published by someone else, so I've just contributed to it. As far as like when to go into it, we are currently in a stage where we are beginning to weigh up our options. So this is all extremely relevant. We're considering,
Yeah, I was going to say we're getting this at the actual time of contemplation. That's it. Ooh, really. Yeah, I'd love to hear what considerations are in your mind.
So I mean, a big part of it is what we'd be willing to concede on, what changes would be, what concessions could we make, what we're willing to change if it changed formats, if we went with someone else. And the other point Leo made being about making art and making it look pretty and stuff, that's been a really big priority as well. So currently we are sourcing key arts, things that we think really sell the setting and the system, which we hope will, whether it's publishers getting excited about the project, but also just, if it goes to Kickstarter or even just fans who will be able to get on board because they can now kind of visualize what the text is just talking about.
That makes a lot of sense. So as far as sort of like that format question, is that something that the game is dictating, or is that something that is more dictating by the publishing considerations that you have been thinking of?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're just in the last few years, we're opening up a lot more formats than were available previously. It was always just the default would be like a dirty, great big book, maybe some dice, cards if you're feeling excited. But there's so much more available now. I mean, you could publish a whole thing that's only ever digital, doesn't ever need to be physical. And then suddenly print size doesn't matter as much anymore. And once you go into PDF, why not just make it a website and let people log in? Like, I think we're going to be seeing some really cool stuff in the near future. That said, standard has a place, and a book and some dice do work. That's what our game was built around. And a lot of extra nice to haves like miniatures and card packs factor in pretty heavily into what can actually be made, shipped elsewhere, and everything else. Print on demand is a really nice thing. But, if you actually want to be sending out people your products, simplifying is a good way to go. So, just a book that can be printed, bound, and fired off works pretty well.
Just on the topic of formats, I guess, you'd also want to consider maybe also if your crowd is small, just I guess going with a PDF or a website or electronic form, just because your overheads and the cost of printing will be significantly lower. So it is something to consider that when you're going through and trying to make physical mediums, you need to be aware of, one, shipping. COVID has really messed with shipping. And also print costs, where you're going to source it, and how big your book is going to affect how much money you'll be pouring into print and how much that affects your bottom line. It affects how much you need to make as a minimum in order to make the venture successful.
Very much so. How about you, Vee? So at what stage do you start thinking about publishing, and what are you thinking of when you're deciding on product design?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'm really excited about that is that there is a lot more formats and a lot more ways that creators are empowered in this day and age, with like zines being really accessible now and like PDFs being really easy to make and distribute. And I think that game jams are also a really great way to like start getting your game out there if it's a first time kind of like making a product, in the sense of like making a complete project. So yeah, those are really good formats. I love that you can choose. I think for me, sometimes it's weird. Sometimes some games dictate the form they want to be, and that's the way around it goes. Sometimes when I make it, it's actually the opposite. Like I want to push myself in a certain direction. Whether that's because I'm curious about it, or there's like it's more practical for a particular kind of project, and to do it in a particular way. Like say what Dave was saying about like it's so easy to get like a print on demand book, and so it's sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. Sometimes I start with a game design and it becomes I think about what the best way to translate that into a product is, how people are going to want to use it. And other times, like with our little box games, that actually came as more like we wanted to make a line of products that was these small self-contained boxes that required no prep. You could just pull it out and play, kind of as like almost like a gateway RPG kind of idea. And then from that idea, then we started designing the game. So it kind of, I would say, project by project.
So I was going to ask, what are the challenges or maybe opportunities of working in that format?
Yeah, so I think like the challenges is obviously that you have a very compact amount of space and time, i.e., like the rulebook is very short. So everything needs to be condensed, which actually takes longer than you might think to shrink things down. So I think that it does mean that like your games need to be played in one session, which means you can't have like a big book of monsters and lore, and that people can't digest and do that work beforehand. So it all has to happen and unfold on the table. But that's also really exciting because that's a different kind of game and space to kind of delve into, especially with people who've not had experience in role playing. It's interesting to try and see how you can bridge up to those, to get new people into role playing for the very first time in one session.
Awesome. So we've talked a bit about how there's sort of an overlap between product design and usability, and how easy it is for someone to read and sort of understand your rules and use your game for what you hope that they will use it for. I'd be interested in hearing some tips from you about how you can make your games easier to sort of access and play and understand. What can help new players or GMs to really dive in and get started with your game, and how you approach that question. David, would you like to jump in first with that one?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think one is digital versions of everything make it a lot easier. They can be searched through, so they can find text that they're looking for, and it's lightweight. Obviously, it's only your computer or whatever else. I also think video guides of things, running a stream, showing off how your game or how you think it runs. I mean, sure, they'll have their own spin on it, but it's just great to see how the developers think it's played, or just get some insight into the world. I think mentioning inspirations you took is great. I personally love to see what another developer was inspired by, because I can really kind of like grok what they were going for and maybe what they drew from. And then if I consume that original media, I might get my own kind of interpretation on it, where I can take that project in another cool way as I play it at my table. I guess lastly, for like the actual product that's being made, I think art is so important, whether it's large pieces that help you to kind of know where you are in the book and what it is that you're looking at, or even just like small little doodles to just quickly show this is a rough map of what I'm kind of going for, and this is a symbol of what I think these dudes look like. Just gives a lot of context and 1,000 words and all that, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like visual things can both communicate that atmosphere and flavor, but they can also be little cues for our mind to remember what things are connected and how things match up with each other. So that's a really useful approach. Vee, how about you? What's your approach to accessibility and helping people understand how to play?
Yeah, I agree with Dave. Videos can be really, really helpful. So how to play video, actual plays, they're really, really good way of drawing people in. But also I think that, being the graphic designer on the team, like there's a lot that you can say with not just the art, but like the way that the information is presented, the graphic design, or whether it's like the flavor text, and whether you can kind of do that in an interesting, in theme, in world way, and kind of tie in bits of lore in through the text or through like a sidebar. There's a lot of like kind of those kinds of elements in role playing, which is really fun to pepper through. And I think that starts building a theme and tone to your game even before they kind of like read it, when they're just like flipping through your book or whatever. They can sort of get a sense of that.
That's really cool. But yeah, Leo, what's your approach?
I was actually going to build on that whole graphic design thing. I actually think that the most important artistic aspect on the team is not the artists, the ones that do the illustrations, the ones that does the pictures. Is actually the graphical layout and how you carry across the theme and idea of your book. Because that's what people are going to be seeing most of the time when they're going through your book, they're going through your document. They're going to see those little design elements that you've thrown in to help cultivate and, I guess, sway people to a certain mindset. And it really does help having a coherent theme throughout the book. other things you do want to consider is how people use your product. So Twitter is a good example of this. Twitter, have you guys heard the term doom scrolling before? Okay, so it's basically with Twitter's feed, it keeps loading more and more images as you kind of scroll down the page, and it keeps loading more and more, and it doesn't really want you to stop. So if you're designing for a digital medium like a phone or a tablet, you need to be aware that's what people are used to. They're going to keep flicking down. So you'll want to use like really strong headers just to break up the other bits of information. You want to be able to categorize things so that people can go, that's a keyword I can search up. That's a idea I can jump back to. Whereas in books, in physical medium, we're talking about how people traditionally read from left to right, top to bottom. So you'll want to put the most important pieces at the top left, and then have all the other information flow down, guiding your GMs, guiding your players to read the information and digest it in a simple and orderly fashion without causing too much eye strain or causing too much having to flick back and forth between different concepts. So you need to be able to localize and group different parts of your game very well to keep people's attention and to keep them from getting confused. So I guess layout is king. Layout is very much something that you should spend a lot of time on when you're creating a product.
And it's almost like two pieces of the same puzzle, isn't it? Because David was talking about how important it is to have the PDF version that is searchable. And then you also have the physical version where people have more time, they're sitting down with more time to read. And, that can create more immersion into that reading experience. And it's very interesting where at the moment, a lot of games have both a PDF and a physical implementation, that those don't necessarily always have to just replicate each other. But exactly as you said, Leo, they can have different purposes as well. And that I think is where we're going. I think we're bridging over into that.
I think especially because of the COVID season, people are less likely to pick up physical copies.
Yeah, online play has been obviously continuing to grow, which has been very good for Australians, I'd say, since we can play with people from all over the world.
It just means we lose a little bit of sleep.
All right, so moving onwards to our next topic. So you've made an RPG, you've published it, you've chosen the right format. Now you're also obviously going to hope that people will play it. So how do you approach spreading the word about your RPG and attracting new players to give it a go for the first time? Vee, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I think that running more games and demoing the game is a really good way, and conventions are really great. Even online conventions are also a good way of getting eyes on your project. But not only that, it allows people to play it and experience it, and that's really what I found connects people to your game, because once they've had an emotional experience with your game, they're going to be just that much more connected to it. And if you've got friends or other people who are on board the project to run and help you with that, that's really great. But otherwise, you can do that yourself. And the more sort of games and groups you run it for, I think helps the word of mouth a lot. I think that's a really cool way of sort of spreading word about your game, is to get it played. And hopefully those people will take it on and play, run it for another group of people and another group of people. RPGs in many ways are an oral tradition, I think. And so starting that tradition is good.
That is very true. The dark art of not knowing what is an RPG until you've played an RPG is still very real. How about you, Leo? What's your approach to getting new players to give your game a go?
I think it comes, I guess, in three different layers, because people's attention spans these days are pretty short. They're getting shorter and shorter. Because I remember being as a kid, I didn't mind watching the commercials, and now they pop up on YouTube. I'm like, a 30-second video? I don't have time for this. But I guess the deal with trying to get people to play your game is that you need something to catch their attention first. You need a good elevator pitch. You need a good cover image to grab their attention. You need to get their attention so that you can start an engagement with them. So you start with a pretty picture, something that captures the essence of your game, something that people thinking, what is going on? What is this? Is this what I like? And if they happen to get interested, they'll read your pitch, your elevator pitch, which is usually about, I don't know, a paragraph long. And it's usually something that highlights the format of the game. So for Parslings, it'd be like, Parslings, a deck building tabletop RPG with a focus on collaborative word magic. And in that first sentence, I've already loaded half a dozen buzzwords. I've loaded tabletop RPGs. If you're a fan, you like to come, you might want to try it out. Deck building, if you're into that sort of game, this is a game for you. And then collaborative word magic. This is what the game is about. It's about piecing things together as a puzzle. And it's all about words and language. And I've got all my hooks already kind of primed and ready in that first sentence. And then my subsequent sentences are either, I will be either targeting players who are more interested in the setting, and I'll be talking about the world. Or I'll be targeting GMs or other designers by talking about mechanics. It really depends on which crowd I'm trying to bring in, because you could either easily target the players who might pick up your book, but then they're not going to GM. They're not going to share this game. They're not going to play this game with other people, because a lot of people are hesitant to be a GM. So you have to mix in a bit of setting and a bit of mechanics, because first the GM wants to know, is this something going to be interesting for my players? And how easily can I run this? What barriers are there that I need to encounter? And by getting through those bits, you can start a conversation with someone when someone asks, oh, hey, I like this. Can you tell me more about it? And then you can expand. But the whole part of getting engagement is to create hooks to drag in that first conversation, because you can go out asking people to play, but if you don't present them with something tantalizing, something that they want to play, they're going to go off and play D&D.
Yes, that is very much true. How about you, David? What's your approach to getting new players to give your game a try?
Yeah, so I mean, at cons and things, especially, the elevator pitch is super important because people are flying by at the speed of light, and you need to tie them down long enough to at least try it out. I found that fast is better than accurate, or at least better than descriptive. You just need to be able to get them to get the idea at least long enough that you can then have that longer conversation, because that's when you can really show what you're super excited about. So you need to be able to get the point of the setting and the system across pretty quickly. I think a good tool for that, it might not work when you actually put it in the book or anything, is just saying what it's similar to. You can say this is kind of like, media brand, but tied with other brand, or game system, and then they they'll know what that is, and they'll know if they're familiar with it, and if it's something that they might be interested in. Yeah, thanks.
The other thing I would add, in terms of the online world of that, is it's always really helpful to have something to point people towards on if they want to know more, go to this website, or and have that all ready to go, loaded up, so that you can always direct people to something if they need to know more about it. So it's very helpful.
I would advise against directing people directly to social media, because in all likelihood, your social media isn't a perfect representation of the game, especially if you've been using it for advertising. I've made that mistake way too many times.
Yeah. A website is good. A website
is great. Website is a good idea.
Yeah, one from personal experience there, it sounds like. But all right. So I'm going to move on now to my last question, moving us to the very end of this process. You've made your game, you've published it, you've found people to play it, and it's out there in the world. Is there anything else to be done? What role does aftercare play? This might be a hypothetical one for you, David, looking forward, but what is there for a designer to do once their product is out in the world, and how can they continue to support it over time? Vee, I don't know if you have something jumping out at you for this one.
Yeah, so I think a good example from us, when we did Good Society, we also afterwards we did expansion for it, which took the like Jane Austen world into other settings like swords and magic and fae courts and things like that. Other ways to play the game, basically, and like kind of adding that depth to the game so that people can sink their teeth into more and enjoy like. I mean, there's a bit of give and take in that because one of the joys about having a game out there is you do get that feedback and you do get more information about what people are enjoying about your game and what they might be interested in doing with it, and being engaged with that dialogue with your players, and then being able to kind of grow your maybe core content into something else. But being open to those opportunities is been very fun and fruitful for me personally. And then the other thing is just like if there are commonly asked questions or something or mistakes in the game, that you can like very easily keep a record of that and change it as you know, with all the PDFs these days, it's not that hard to change and update those things as you find all the typos you inevitably missed, even though you've read it 50 billion times.
I feel that last one.
Very much so. And it's always interesting, isn't it? What players and people who have run your game can tell you about your game even long after it's out that you never realized yourself before. So that insight is always very interesting. How about you, David? What approach do you think you might take, or what have your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so any project I've worked on in the past, such a big part of it is like a retrospective at the end of it, where you go back and you look at the whole process of how you've handled things, what went well and what went poorly, or, you know, could be improved upon. And that's why I think, you know, documenting the process as you go through it is important, because at the end, there'll always be something you could have done a little better. Maybe you should have done testing earlier, or maybe in hindsight, you know, you don't actually like the mechanical system, you don't want to try it again, or just more general, you know, you took on too many hours, you had other commitments, you know, you just don't want to do that again, so you want to try and dial it back. So I think a big part of it is sitting down and looking at the whole process, deciding what you'd change going forward, and making sure you're learning from it. You know, the next one's always going to be smoother, and you can always improve on something.
Yeah, that's great advice. Rather than thinking about things you didn't do so well, but how can you improve on that? How can you move forward and make that a bit better next time? I think that's a really great approach. How about Lee?
Leah.
How about you, Leah? What's your approach to aftercare? What there is still to be done once the game is out in the world?
I guess I'm going to be building on a bit of both of what Vee and David said, like the separate points. But I guess if the first thing to assess is, why did you make the project? Was it meant to be a one-off? Was it meant to get your name out there? Or was it a long-term project? And if it's the once off, the retrospective is perfect to do. It's about seeing what you did, how you can do it better, and how you can use what you've built now to propel your next project into the future. Because every time you make something, you get a small percentage of fans that are going to be loyal to you, that are going to move and support your next project, which means you can go a little bit bigger, you can go a little bit faster, or you can make a bigger team. And being able to analyze and see where your faults are, or what you did well, and then what are your strengths, is a very important thing. If you're going to do a long-term project, you need to start thinking, okay, did I hit my mark? Did I get enough of a response to what I did? How can I improve that? And is this project something I'm going to continue working on, or should I cut my losses there? Again, the last one's a little bit intimidating, to say the least, because you've put a lot of love and a lot of time into that project, but sometimes you didn't hit the market. Sometimes you didn't hit the mark. Sometimes you didn't get the response you expected. You haven't gotten people continually playing your game afterwards. And honestly, it's really hard, because I remember reading somewhere there was like another 13,000 RPGs out there right now. I might be wrong with those figures, but the whole idea is that you need to know where you're going to go on from here, whether you're going to continue promoting it, creating new content, as Vee said, or you're going to start a new project and use parts of the game that you like, cannibalize it, and then make something new. It's all about that decision that you make at the end once you finish the game, once you published it, and once it's been run for a good couple months. And you can kind of see what happens, whether it was a success or it could have been done better. So it's all about where you are, really.
Absolutely. And I think that's a huge skill, being able to really honestly look at something that you've completed and think, well, what are the learnings I can take out of this from what went well? And what's the realistic state of this going forward, whether it's worth pursuing or not. So I think that could be tough, as you said, but it's really important as well. All right. So we've gone through the whole process from initially knowing when you're going to continue to develop an idea all the way through development, play testing, publishing, marketing, and what there is to be done after the game is out there. And we've also gone through most of the time we have for our panel today. So to wrap up, if everyone could tell us where we might find you on the internet and where we might learn more about the projects that you are working on. David, you want to jump in first there?
Absolutely. So I am Dave. You can follow me on Twitter at GoodShipFunTrip, and I also post about Time Without Tide there. More regularly, I am also on the Chaosium stream of Chaos, where we run Call of Cthulhu, so you can catch me there each week as well.
Oh, Leo.
I've got a long list, but I am Leo. I'm the creator of Parslings, which has been published by Smudgy Games. So you can find my personal account at Blue 2 Days on Twitter and Instagram. You can find the Parsling Twitter account at @Parslings, or you can find Smudgy Games by going to smudgygames.com. And I may be working on video games in the future, so we'll see where that goes.
Very exciting. And Vee?
Yes, so the website for us is storybrewersroleplaying.com, but you can also follow at Storybrewers, which is the official account that Hayley runs, or at Rockety_V for me on Twitter. And we are currently running a Kickstarter for Fight with Spirit, which is a sports drama RPG. So you can check that out as well. Or check us, just go to our website and see all of our games on there.
Absolutely. The games in the little boxes, the games in the bigger boxes. All right. So thank you very much for your very wise thoughts and very interesting thoughts. I wish we could stay and chat about more things for longer, but our time is elapsed. So I will say farewell and thank you for everyone listening. We hope you enjoyed the rest. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.